So to kick things off, it's something that I've managed to keep secret for a long time, is that I'm a bit of a nerd.
No way.
And so I'm very jealous.
I don't believe it.
Yeah, that's true. But about an hour ago, you tweeted a photo of you with R2-D2.
I know, right? It was so fun. And what was fun before that is that there was this service dog right before me that was getting its picture taken with R2-D2. So there was this like super well-behaved black lab and R2-D2, and all the scientists, they were like weeping. They couldn't stand it. It was so cute and engaging. So I wasn't quite as cute as the dog, but I was happy about it. Yeah.
John actually did a draft version of his PhD dissertation that was heavily laden with Star Wars references, to the chagrin of his advisor.
Well, the idea was that I think the thrust of it was that the Rotten Tomatoes consensus on Star Wars: The Force Awakens was 93%, which was already considered a high consensus, and the consensus on climate change was even higher.
I think your advisor made the right call, just FYI.
Okay.
Well, I would agree that that's one of the best ways to to talk to people about consensus, because we all have opinions about the second trilogy of Star Wars, and you might be able to use that to tie the room together, get people on board.
It was one of the most shared Facebook posts that I have.
Oh, really?
So, and on the theme of nerddom, then I'm also a big fan of Mr. Spock from Star Trek, and I think that's how the public tend to see scientists. So
Definitely.
you made a big effort to try to crack that I guess stereotype of scientists. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so I am not a very good Vulcan at all. I think as a scientist, I can see the spectrum of the kind of identities that I get to sort of play with. You know, I am a quantitative, objective scientist. I have that capacity to show up and do my work, but that doesn't define everything that I am. You know, I'm also a mother. I am an outdoor recreationist. I love to go skiing. I love sci-fi. I love like you know, really sort of gooey, yucky fantasy that is like shame-based. Like you read the fantasy novel and you're like, no one should see this book, right? So, and I'm a mom, like I have all of these different parts of my identity, right? And I don't have to divest myself from the other pieces of me that I bring to the table. And I think that actually there's a lot of strengths in being transparent about this, right? Because one of the things that we have in this public discussion is whether scientists are biased, whether we have this secret agenda, you know, and obviously we do have agendas, right? We have agendas around like wanting our colleagues to feel safe at meetings, right? Having an inclusive culture in science. I have an agenda about raising voices of underrepresented people in my field. I have some agendas. Again, that doesn't mean that I'm not an objective scientist. And I think we all get introduced to science as this beautiful and pristine landscape where we get to search for truth. And when we're engaged in that process, it's really fulfilling, but it is not the only thing that we're doing. And so, you know, one of the things that I try to practice is being vulnerable in public. Because when you show that you're vulnerable, when you show that you're struggling with the information in front of you, it demonstrates that scientists deeply care. We care a lot about the way that the information that we're generating is used and the communities that are on the front lines of the kinds of impacts that climate change comes with. So you know, if it means that I have to come forward as a real person, like, so be it. I'm a real person.
I mean that takes a lot of courage, because the scientific community, particularly climate science, is a community that's under a lot of attack. So to make yourself vulnerable is
right.
Is potentially, well, I don't know. I mean, it's just
it's totally scary, right? So I'll tell you one of the things that I did before I went to graduate school and started down this road of climate science is I was a whitewater rafting guide. So I would take customers down rivers in the Pacific Northwest. And that is a really intense job. It is super fun. It is one of the best ways to learn about your response to fear. because every day the river is different, and every day you have people that you have to navigate and help and instruct how to be safe in that very dangerous and beautiful place. And so taking people down rivers and getting that traction of like, it doesn't matter how great my day, how safe and happy my customers were the day before, the next day when I wake up, I'm going to have the same kind of interface with fear and showing up and trying to be brave in situations that are a little dicey, you know, a little fear-based. And so getting to that place where you really understand where the edge of your fear, your narrative about being scared is, I think that that's a really rich place, because you get to sit on that edge and think, why is this edge here? You know, what am I so scared of? And why are my colleagues so risk averse in these places? What is at stake, right? And I think when you know, as I've grown intellectually, I really see now that the real things that are at stake are not addressing the role that science has in society, right? The real things at stake are blowing past all the trajectories that the international community has decided on for a limit to global warming, and the planet is essentially a completely different planet in 25 years. That's a way bigger risk than people looking at me and having some narrative about how I'm, you know, at the front lines of communicating science in a way that contradicts what scientists should be doing, right? The personal risks that I have are completely eclipsed by the risks that we all share as a community, as human beings. So
if you could kind of talk a little bit more about that. So my interest is kind of, do you feel so if we were talking to a bunch of other young researchers, early career scientists, or grad students,
yeah,
you know, my assumption was that maybe there was a generational divide in that the older scientists kind of were more risk averse, but it kind of doesn't sound that way the more people we talk to, in that maybe because they have more to lose, maybe because they have less security, whatever, the younger scientists are just as concerned about stepping out of these stereotypes of what a scientist should sound and look like than their maybe older colleagues do. So do you think, where do you think this feeling of I should fit in this box is it like career concerns? Is it self-doubt? Is it like, so how much of this is kind of like an external job thing versus just like an internalized stereotype thing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things going on in the minds of young scientists as they're growing. I gotta do some kick-ass science, right? And I need my colleagues to see me participating in the scientific process in a rigorous way that shows that the things that I am discovering are meaningful and useful, and that they're based on evidence and they're based on the training that I have been given. So we're all trying to do that work, right? And so along with that comes a lot of the imposter syndrome, the narratives, the internal narratives that scientists are juggling with, which is, who do I think I am? Should I really be here? Am I allowed to participate in this space? I've always considered scientists to be white guys in lab coats in isolated rooms doing work that I could never approach. And so I think that there's a lot of things that younger scientists are juggling with, and they're trying to fight inside these internal narratives around fitting in, doing good work, having buy-in from their colleagues and their superiors, and not contradicting the worldviews of their senior colleagues, right? Because if your senior colleagues are the ones that are going to be on the hiring committee, they're going to be the one on the committee that evaluates your tenure package, or the ones that in the halls behind you when you're not there are discussing your quote-unquote, you know, character and scientific kind of personality. You're in the firing line. Like, there is so much criticism of scientists by other scientists. It's a deeply critical place. And okay, so that criticism, number one, it's important because we have to have a conversation inside of the community that requires all of us to try to be better on a daily basis. Like, the criticism is not going to go away. And we all need to be resilient to criticism, and we actually have to begin to evaluate our own work from that critical lens so that we are the first people to criticize our own work. That's how our work progresses and becomes better. But, no one really likes to be criticized, right? It hurts, and it makes us feel it engages that shame narrative around I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not good enough, and so I don't know how you build the emotional skill set to really address the shame narratives, to address the imposter syndrome. I mean, the way that I think I've done it is you die the death. You say, like, yeah, I do mess up, like I do make mistakes, and I own those mistakes, and every single mistake I make, I'm going back and I'm fixing it. And frankly, all my colleagues make mistakes too, and they're all aware of it too. We're all a part, I mean, it's a human business, right? And it is so challenging to both, conform and fit into the scientific culture, address the internal narratives of, should I have a place here? And then actually work on getting better, right? To show up for the science every day and say, yesterday was one thing, today is a new thing, and today I'm gonna do this even better, and I'm gonna think about this in an even more sharp and articulate way. Because, essentially, like, I'm a public servant, right? The work that I do has all of this, like, broad consequence to our scientific culture, our broader culture, and so I feel that edge of obligation of, like, I need to show up and do a good job at this work. So, yeah, it's a struggle.
I've sort of, I'm just on the topic of science communication, I've had to sort of make a similar decision where there's a spectrum from, if you're looking on how to, like, package how to communicate a science message, from a simpler message that will reach more people to a more, qualified, complicated message where you make sure you put in all the scientific details to make sure that you're as bulletproof as possible.
Right.
And the more bulletproof the message becomes,
the more obscured you become. Yeah.
But the safer you are.
Yeah.
And so as you simplify it to be more impactful and reach more people, you also open yourself to more criticism. And so you have to make a decision on where you go on that spectrum. And I made a decision that, all right, I will go simpler and reach more people, but I know that going with that will come more attacks. And kind of valid criticisms in a way sometimes, because you are making the message simpler and losing some of the details. But
totally,
every science communicator has to make that decision.
I think so, and it's about being risk averse, evaluating the spectrum of risk that you're navigating and finding yourself on that spectrum. Where do I want to sit? Do I want to go with the simple messages that do have some public exposure risk, where you're right, there are a lot of nuances and caveats in the way that we understand the science. The fields are so deep, right? There's so much depth and history and context for all of the science that we do. And so I get that, right? And that's part of, like, navigating that spectrum of risk. And for me, I think I end up being out front at a more risky place because I think it's more effective. I think you reach more people. I think we need people at the front of the lines that look like me, that sound like me, that empower the other women that I know and the other junior scientists to say, well, if she can do it, like, I can do it. I'm as qualified of a scientist as she is to come forward and make statements about these things. The other thing about that spectrum of risk is that, the fields are really deep. There's all this nuance. The real thing about climate science, though, is that across these broad fields, there is so much coherency and agreement. There is incredible agreement about the drivers of climate science, the climate change, the ways that the planet has operated in the past. And we're talking agreement across instruments we put at the top of the atmosphere, ice cores we extract from Greenland, and very complex simulations in computers that take a decade to run. So there is incredible agreement, and really, I think as I've grown as a scientist, I've become more comfortable in knowing, there is a great agreement around the statements that I make around climate change, and I am actually safe in the things that I say. I stand behind everything that I say. Like, I talk a lot in the public. I go home and I have the, oh God, what did I say? Kind of internal, like, oh God, okay, and I sit for a second and I play with my kid and I feed my cat and I think about it. And I don't think I have ever said anything in the public spaces that contradicts the consensus around the science. So you know, getting to that point where you're ready to come forward and be like, hey, you know, I'm not a sea level expert. I may not be an expert in instrumentation at the top of the atmosphere, but I know the science, and I know what my field of science is contributing to this very big picture.
On that, kind of a little bit of a tangent, you're a paleo person, you're kind of a modern and a paleo person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a paleo person,
mm-hmm.
We and you're not talking about paleo diet, are you?
Sorry. As a climate of the
I
past,
do like vegetables.
climate of the past, climate of maybe even the ancient past, depending on what you're considering ancient.
Mm-hmm.
One of the myths that we hear a lot is that, you know, kind of climate science is basically, it's all just made up in computer models about the future, and so we don't know what's going to happen in the future because the future hasn't happened yet. It's all simulations. You can get any answer you want out if you put whatever you want in. As a researcher who deals with paleoclimate, I often wonder. I feel like paleoclimate as a communication tool to the general public. If the public was maybe more aware, like, hey, we're going to get more of this kind of dead zone behavior in the Gulf of Mexico because we can look back in time and see this sort of thing happen when you warm up.
Yeah.
Which is something that you work on. If you feel like that's maybe an undervalued rebuttal, an undervalued communication tool.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but the thing is that they're so engaging, right? You talk to people and you're like, hey, tree rings and ice cores and sediment cores, these are the actual things that recorded Earth's climate in the past. Like, they were there. They have embedded information that is so useful and so relevant to what's happening right now on the planet and what's going to happen in the future. And, you know, the thing is, kids get it. Like, you show kids the rings in a tree and they can count back the years. They know that tree is 100 years old, and they know that that tree was living, you know, at a time where their parents weren't around. And I think there's this really very undervalued sort of currency of talking about these archives and relating like how beautiful and fascinating they are. Like, so I did my doctorate on this sediment core from Santa Barbara Basin in California. I looked at thousands, like hundreds of thousands of organisms that came out of this sediment core. And like piece by piece, under a microscope, I was able to see how that seafloor was changing in step with all of the climatic changes that came with the recent rapid warming of the deglaciation. I was able to see organisms that came and went ephemerally that were these beautiful signs of the ecosystem responding very rapidly to climate change. The thing about that is that the records in Santa Barbara are just as beautiful and as important as any of the ice cores that have come out of Greenland or Iceland. They tell us the same coherent thing. And so, you know, to be in my shoes and to sit with all of those organisms and to catalog and document and ID the communications with museum specialists and the detailed and nuanced and painstaking work that we did to reconstruct how the ocean in California was a very different ocean in the middle of the deglaciation than the ocean that we now enjoy in our modern world. It's irrefutable evidence that there are major consequences that come with climate warming, and that we take these Earth systems to be very stable. We take them for granted, and they're not stable. They're deeply unstable when you perturb the carbon system in the atmosphere. And so I would love for, you know, that experience to be shared by other people, because to me it was this beautiful demonstration that the Earth is so complex and organisms are so incredible in their way of responding to climate warming and the physical changes that come with that. And so there's this elegance and beauty in it to me that is so engaging, and so it draws me in, you know, it keeps me up at night.
Last night I was listening to Bob Inglis talk about how he's a conservative politician from one of the most conservative parts of the country, and didn't accept climate science. And then he went to Antarctica and saw the ice cores telling the story of the Earth's past, and that was the first thing that cracked his shell.
Good for him. Good for him to see it with your own eyes, you know, and to see like, oh my God, there is some incredible engineering going on to get this stuff out of this glacier. And the people that are doing this engineering are really great technicians and scientists. And the way that they're evaluating these ice cores is really complex. It's really quantitative. It is unbiased. You can't measure an ice core in a biased way. Like your colleagues are going to be like, hey, don't do that, right?
There's no Republican versus Democrat.
No, definitely not. And I love that because people need to see it with their own eyes sometimes to really buy in that, oh, there are powerful ways of knowing how the planet works. And it works, the science works really well. Like, if I can carry a computer around in my pocket and communicate with people in Hong Kong in a second, we can extract sediment cores from California and use them to understand Earth climate. We can extract ice cores from Greenland. So we have this incredible technical capacity to do work that is really effective.